have to admit that there are times that I listen to the choir. Such beauty, such passion, such love that they put into their songs, into their hymns, and I say to myself, "That's enough. Let's go home," because it was just so beautiful, so wonderful. So, thank you so deeply. Can't go home yet, but maybe we should. What's in a name? As I was researching this sermon this past week, I came back. It kept on coming back. A story I've probably told you before, but when I was a little child, my parents didn't call me by the name that you know me by, Martin or Marty. They called me Johnny. That's what my parents called me. My full name is Martin John. And to all of my family members, my siblings, this is before my youngest brother Andrew was alive, I was Johnny. One week I was in the hospital, tonsils I think it was, back in the early 60s, 61, 62. My dad worked out of town, and when he arrived back in town, he came to see me, went to the hospital and said, "I'm here to see Johnny Mollengrath." And the nurse there said, "Well, we don't have a Johnny Mollengrath." "Yes, you do, and he's here." "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no record of a Johnny Mollengrath." "Check again, because he is here." And you have to know my dad. He would be getting, you think I'm passionate sometimes? He would get passionate, exasperated, and angry all in one breath. "Sir, we don't have a Johnny Mollengrath. We do have a Martin Mollengrath. That's him. That's him. Let me see him." What's in a name? In the passage today, read so beautifully by Lem, Jesus is asking asking the disciples who they think he is. By what name do they call me, in essence? Jesus was talking about his identity. And in Mark's gospel, this follows the great acts of compassion of Jesus feeding the crowds on the hillside. "Who do people say that I am?" And they said to him, "Some say you are Elijah." They call you Elijah. "Some say you are John the Baptist, come back from the dead." Others say you are a prophet, a great prophet in the history of all the prophets. "Who do you say that I am?" Jesus asked them directly. And Peter was the one who responded, "You are the Christ. You are the Messiah." And then these strange words from Jesus, "Don't tell anybody who I really am." Then he began to teach them that he was going to die, that to be the Messiah, to be the Christ, meant that he was going to die an untimely death. And Peter rebuked him. Harsh words that Peter offered to Jesus. It doesn't quite say it in the text that Lem wrote, but you can imagine, "Shut up, Jesus. That's not what's going to happen to you. Be quiet. We don't want to hear that. John the Baptist already died. We don't need or want you to die as well." Harsh words back to Peter from Jesus. You are speaking of earthly things. You're not speaking of heavenly things. Shut up, Peter. You don't know what you're talking about. Get behind me, Satan. And then this teaching, after those kind of harsh words, this teaching about denying self, about taking up our crosses and following Jesus. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, if you truly want to be my followers, if you want to be the followers of the Christ, the Messiah, then it needs to be part of your identity. It needs to be part of who you are. It needs to be what people call you as. Caroline Lewis, a contemporary theologian, has some beautiful words to say about this passage, and she says exactly that. Who you say Jesus is, she says, is who you have decided to be. You can't answer Jesus' inquiry about revealing who you are unless it betrays who Jesus is. Jesus' question is not a test. It's not about getting the answer right. It's the moment, Caroline Lewis says, when you come face to face with your own commitment, your own discipleship, your own identity. It's the moment when you have to admit to what extent and how you follow Jesus. In this passage, it becomes really quite evident that it's not easy to be a follower of Jesus. In this passage, to be a follower of Jesus is to recognize that those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their lives for the sake of the gospel or for Jesus' sake, they will save it. Reminds us, or perhaps some of us, of the great book written by H. entitled The Cost of Discipleship. To actually be a follower of Jesus, it costs something. What name might you dare to give to Jesus? You know, we call Jesus, we call God by all kinds of different names. We call God comfort, love, compassion, forgiveness, grace. These are all beautiful names of Jesus, beautiful names that we call God. Inclusion, beautiful names. But none of those names mean anything unless we live those things out. Our definition of Jesus, or who we call Jesus, is not just someone or some being or some mystery that offers us comfort and grace. To call Jesus comfort and grace means that Jesus is also the ground of our service and comfort towards others, the wellspring of our desire and our ability to serve others. To call Jesus by the name of comfort gives us comfort, no doubt. But it also makes each and every one of us incredibly uncomfortable. And that discomfort that we call Jesus is the discomfort that encourages us to get out of our boat, as Barb talked about last week, in service towards others. For in that discomfort, we truly find comfort. It seems strange. I came across a Catholic teaching for the 24th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle B, in the lectionary readings that really speaks to this. It says this: love is itself the fulfillment of all of our works. There is the goal. That is why we run. We run towards it, and once we reach it, that is love for others. Once we reach it, then we shall find rest. Caroline Lewis is right. Who we think Jesus is and who we recognize ourselves to be are deeply related. So I ask this question again. Who do you dare to call Jesus this morning? Who do we dare to call ourselves? It's a hard passage. It's not an easy passage. I remember a number of years ago, people in the news are saying that we may be heading towards an election. I remember an election, a federal election, it's got to be 15, 20 years ago, I can't remember. This young man, they interviewed this young man who said, literally, I can't stand the politic that tells me that I am responsible for my brother. Those were the words that he used. I can't stand it. We all stand on our own 2 feet, and I can't stand it when politicians tell us that we are responsible for each other. The anger, the fear, the disgust, they were all very evident in his voice. He wanted to be left alone, to make his own way, to be his own source of peace and comfort, fulfillment, joy, happiness. He believed strongly if people would just leave him alone so that he could be his own person, that he would find that sense of comfort and joy. Jesus sees it very, very differently. When we put our heart in lives of service, that's when we find rest. When we decide for ourselves that we will care for others, that's when we'll find fulfillment and peace. When we risk our own comfort for the comfort of others, that's when we'll find deep meaning and connection. I've been your minister for a very short 3 years, but I see these things in you. Take a look at Gary and Yolanda, who head up the welcome team, and who so graciously invite and welcome and make sure people are welcome, particularly if they are new to this church and new to this country. Take a look at Jeff, our custodian, who takes people who are new to the church and new to the country on trips to Niagara Falls out of his own pocket. Take a look at Bob Fuster and the entire Roy Street Task Force. Look at their hearts with respect to caring for adults with differing abilities. They want to make sure the Roy Street Project that offers housing, programs, and services and a deep sense of belonging in an intentional community is offered for some of the most vulnerable in our society, and they are working hard at their own cost to try to make sure that happens. Look at Jan and the entire outreach team, including but not limited to Larry and Carol, who for years in this place have raised awareness of food insecurity, both locally and abroad. Look at people like Paul and Stephen, working hard to make sure that a daycare comes to St. Andrews. Why? Well, you ask Paul himself. In a meeting earlier this week, he said to us, can you imagine the impact of a daycare here in the downtown community? It is so needed. They've decided, all of these people have decided who Jesus is and who they are as Jesus followers. Look at Mary Weber and Linda Creed, kind and compassionate people who are always praying. And how do I know that? Because they tell me. They are always praying for the leadership of this congregation. That's their ministry. They too have decided who Jesus is and who they are. The list goes on and on and on and on. I love this congregation in part because there are so many people who have decided who Jesus is. They know the name of Jesus and they know who they are. It's in the DNA of this congregation to serve, and in that service to find comfort. So I urge you, stay true to that DNA as a congregation. In midst of all of the changes, both in church and society, listen to the leaders amongst you. Follow them in lives of service. Challenge yourselves to go beyond your comfort zone. Don't lose sight of Jesus, even when it costs you, even when it is extremely uncomfortable. Why? Because that's who Jesus is. If we dare call Jesus by the names of comfort and care and love and forgiveness and grace and inclusion. This community needs St. Andrew's to roar out with those names of Jesus. This community needs St. Andrew's to speak powerfully for inclusion and belonging. So when people that you don't know enter into this building on a Sunday or a Monday or any day of the week, treat them with kindness, practice hospitality, let go of any residual feelings that you have about this building being your church, and create a welcome that people will feel as soon as they walk through the doors. Gospel passage today tells us that to be truly alive is to be in service to one another, to care for each other, to be each other's keeper with a deep sense of community and connectedness. I invite you to do that so that when someone comes through the door asking for people whose name is community or connectedness or care or compassion or inclusion, and someone at the front desk says, we don't have anybody here by that name. This is St. Andrew's Church. We are Christian. And the person says, that's them. That's who I need to see. Thanks be to God. Amen.